Indiana, flat fields stretching to the horizon. Small towns with church steeples rising above the tree line. Quiet roads cutting through forests so dense the light barely reaches the ground. It looks peaceful and safe. It looks like exactly the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. Indiana's memory is long and dark and full of the kind of suffering that doesn't just disappear when the people who caused it are gone. Tonight we go to 3 places in the heartland of America where that suffering never stopped. A hospital where thousands died, coughing in the dark, and never found the exit. A mansion where the people hiding in the basement died in a fire and were buried in secret to protect the man who was supposed to save them. And a cemetery so deep in the forest that by the time you find it, you will be too late to turn around. Thank you for joining me on this journey to uncover the most haunted and terrifying places in all 50 states. This is Indiana's most haunted places. We might think the heartland is safe. Indiana State Sanatorium, the hospital where the dying never left. There is a specific kind of horror that belongs to hospitals. Not the dramatic, sudden horror of violence or catastrophe, but the slow horror. The kind that builds over years and decades. The kind that settles into the walls, into the floors, into the very air of a building, as thousands of human beings come through the doors sick and frightened and full of hope, and leave in a box. The Indiana State Sanatorium understood that kind of horror intimately. To understand the Indiana State Sanatorium, you first have to understand what tuberculosis was in the early 20th century. TB, called consumption in an earlier era, was the most feared disease in America. It was slow, relentless, and it was everywhere. Tuberculosis attacked the lungs, slowly destroying them from the inside. Victims would constantly and painfully be coughing and often coughing up blood, as their lungs filled with fluid and their bodies wasted away. The process could take months or years, but through all the pain, the patient was conscious and aware that they were dying slowly. The only treatment available in the early 1900s was isolation and rest. So TB patients were sent to sanatoriums, facilities specifically designed to house them away from the general population, where they could rest in fresh air and where their infectious coughing wouldn't spread the disease further. What this meant in practice was that TB patients were taken from their families, transported to facilities that could be hundreds of miles away, and left there to wait, to hope, and very often, to die. The Indiana State Sanatorium was built in 1907 on a sprawling campus in Terre Haute. It was designed to hold several hundred patients. At its peak, it housed over 1,000, far beyond its intended capacity. Patients slept in rows, coughed through the nights, and watched the person in the next bed die and be replaced by another dying person. The death toll at Indiana State Sanatorium over its decades of operation runs into the thousands. Some estimates place it higher. The records are incomplete, a fact that makes the accounting of exactly how many people died within those walls impossible to finalize. Many people died, slowly, painfully, isolated, and frightened. These patients left an imprint on the building that no amount of time has faded. The sanatorium later transitioned into a state hospital serving other populations before eventually closing. Today, the property operates as a paranormal tourism destination because of the constant activity that there is simply no pretending otherwise. The phenomena at Indiana State Sanatorium are among the most varied and consistently reported of any location in the Midwest. The coughing is what investigators mention first. In the old patient wards, particularly the upper floors where the sickest patients were housed, the sound of coughing drifts through the empty rooms. Not one person coughing, but many. An overlapping, wet, relentless coughing of lungs full of fluid has been heard by investigators, tour guides, and by visitors who came in skeptical and left shaken. One lead investigator from an Indianapolis paranormal research team described the first experience in the upper ward. The investigator was alone, conducting a baseline sweep before bringing the team up, when the investigator heard a chorus of coughing from rooms that confirmed were empty. The investigator stood in the hallway for nearly 2 minutes, listening to the cough that was coming from the empty rooms, then, scared from the experience, went back downstairs and brought the whole team up together. Ever since, no one from the team dared to do a solo sweep of that floor again. The children's wing is its own chapter of horror. The sanatorium housed children with tuberculosis, children separated from their parents, sick and frightened, and dying in a building full of strangers. Investigators report hearing sounds from the former pediatric section. The sounds of children's laughter echoing from empty rooms, small footsteps in the hallways, and in several documented cases, the sound of a child crying, but not any crying. It sounds as a child is heartbroken. But the crying stops the moment an investigator opens the door to find the source. What sets Indiana State Sanatorium apart from many haunted locations is the degree to which the spirits appear to actively interact with electronic equipment. EMF detectors, which measure electromagnetic fields and spike in the presence of paranormal activity, behave at Indiana State in ways that investigators describe as intelligent. Questions asked aloud receive responses, 1 spike for yes, 2 for no, with enough consistency across enough separate investigations that several research teams have concluded they are communicating with something that understands them. A team that investigated the facility in 2020 brought a spirit box, a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies and is believed by some investigators to allow spirits to communicate through the resulting audio fragments. In one session in the main ward, they asked, "How many of you are here with us tonight?" The spirit box responded clearly and immediately with a single word, "Hundreds." As the investigators heard the word, the room temperature dropped 4 degrees. The Indiana State Sanatorium was built to give people a place to die with dignity. Whether it succeeded in that mission is debatable, but the people who died never left. They are still coughing in the dark, patients waiting for someone to come and help out. Patients still counting the days in a building that forgot to let them go. Hannah House, the mansion built on a secret that burned. In 1858, a man named Alexander Hannah built one of the most beautiful homes in Indianapolis. An Italianate mansion, grand and imposing, rising above Madison Avenue with the confidence of a man who had made his place in the world. Hannah was a successful businessman and politician. He was respected and admired by others. But he was hiding something in his basement that would haunt his house for the next 150 years. Alexander Hannah was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Alexander was one of the networks of abolitionists who risked everything to move escaped slaves from the South to freedom in the North. His beautiful mansion, sitting prominently in Indianapolis. Escaped freedom seekers were smuggled into the basement of the house, hidden there while arrangements were made to move them further north, away from the slave catchers who pursued them. It was dangerous and illegal, but Alexander Hannah did it anyway, because he believed it was right. But something went wrong one night that Alexander Hannah could never undo. The exact details have been obscured by time and by the secrecy that necessarily surrounded the Underground Railroad's operations. But what is known through local history, preserved in the accounts of those who investigated the house in later decades, is that a fire broke out in the basement of Hannah House while freedom seekers were hidden there. In the chaos, in the dark, in the smoke, they could not get out. They died in the basement of a house that was supposed to be their salvation. And then they were buried there in secret on the house property, because revealing what had happened would have revealed Hannah's involvement in the railroad and put every other stop on the network at risk. Their names are not recorded, their numbers are not certain. They came to Hannah House seeking freedom and found fire instead. They were buried in the ground beneath the house and not spoken of. The grief inside Hannah House is palpable. That is the one word every investigator, every sensitive visitor every person who has spent any meaningful time inside uses word palpable to describe how it feels inside the house. Not just a feeling of being watched, or a drop in temperature, or a strange sound. A weight of an emotional atmosphere, so thick with sorrow that it physically presses on you the moment you step inside. The basement is the most haunted area in the house. Investigators who descend into the basement of Hannah House report an immediate and overwhelming shift in atmosphere. The smell arrives first, a smell of decay, of burning, of something that has no business being in a basement that has been cleaned and maintained. A smell that has no source of where it comes from. A smell that appears and disappears without a pattern. Multiple independent witnesses have described in exactly the same terms across decades of investigation. Another report that investigators experience is the feeling of overwhelming sadness. Grief so intense it feels like it belongs to someone else. Several investigators have been brought to tears in the basement without understanding why. One woman, a veteran paranormal researcher with over 15 years of experience, described sitting down on the basement floor during an investigation because her legs simply stopped holding her up. She said she felt a grief so vast and so specific. She also felt the terror of the fire and felt the smoke, the desperation futile searching for an exit in the dark. When she finished the investigation, she did not go back to the basement. The apparitions at Hannah House are among the most frequently and clearly reported in Indiana. Staff and investigators have seen figures throughout the house, in the hallways, on the staircase, looking out from upstairs windows. But the most significant apparitions are those spirits seen in and near the basement, sometimes standing still, sometimes moving slowly through the space, or appearing to be searching for something. The spirits do not interact aggressively. They do not threaten. They seem to simply be present, existing in the space where they died, doing what spirits seem to do in places of tremendous trauma, replaying endlessly the last moments of their lives. One of the most documented phenomena in the house is the movement of objects. Items left in specific positions are found moved, sometimes across the room, sometimes turned or displaced. A team that set up a controlled experiment in the 1990s, placing objects at measured distances and photographing their positions, returned after a night away to find every object had been moved, somewhere in entirely different rooms. Alexander Hannah himself is believed to haunt the upper floors of the house. He is described as a distinguished-looking man in period clothing, seen most often on the staircase and in the master bedroom. Witnesses who have encountered his apparition describe a feeling not of menace, but of profound guilt. As if the man who built this house to do good, and whose good intentions led to catastrophe, has never been able to leave the site of his failure. He saved many people on the Underground Railroad, but he could not save the ones who died in his basement. That is the weight he carries and weight the house carries. That weight, after 150 years, has not lifted even slightly. Hannah House is not haunted by evil. It is haunted by tragedy, by the collision of courage and catastrophe, by the people who came to its basement seeking freedom and found something else entirely. Their names are unknown. Their graves are unmarked, but they are not forgotten because the house itself refuses to forget them. Steps Cemetery, the Witch in the Woods. There are places that the forest protects, places so old, so charged with something that the land itself has absorbed, that the trees grow differently around them, closer, darker, leaning inward as if keeping a secret. The cemetery is hidden in the Morgan Monroe State Forest in Brown County, Indiana, at the end of a trail that winds through dense woodland until the trees open, just slightly enough, to reveal a cluster of weathered headstones in a small clearing. You will know immediately that something is wrong. Stepp Cemetery is a genuine historical burial ground, established in the 1800s to serve the rural community that once lived in that part of Brown County. The legend of the Witch of Stepp Cemetery grew from a real tragedy. A woman. Her name varies across different tellings, but her story is that she lost her child. Some say the child died young. Some say in an accident. Some say to illness. What all versions agree on is what the loss did to the mother. She was consumed by grief. She visited the grave constantly. Neighbors and passers-by reported seeing her sitting at the cemetery at all hours, in all weather, refusing to leave her child's side, even in death. She eventually died. Some say of grief, some say of old age, some say of something less natural. She was buried in the cemetery near her child. Near what is believed to be the woman's grave sits a large, old tree stump, rounded, smooth, and worn, as if used as a seat for many years. In the folklore of Steppe Cemetery, this is her chair, the place she sat in life, keeping vigil over her child's grave, where she sits still. The stump is the center of Steppe Cemetery's most intense paranormal activity. Visitors who approach it report a progressive deterioration in how they feel, a growing sense of dread that increases with proximity, that has nothing to do with the intellectual knowledge that they're in a haunted cemetery, and everything to do with something that feels physical, real, and pressing. Those who sit on the stump report experiences ranging from sudden violent nausea to an overwhelming compulsion to leave the forest immediately. One man who sat on the stump as a dare in 2017 described feeling the moment he made contact with the wood, as if something was sitting directly behind him. Not near him, but behind him, pressed against his back. He stood up so fast he fell forward onto his knees. He left the cemetery at a run and did not stop running until he reached the parking area. He said the feeling of something pressed against his back lasted for the entire drive home. The sound most frequently reported at Steppe Cemetery, from visitors who had never heard anyone else's stories or know about the cemetery before, is the sound of a baby crying from somewhere in the forest beyond the cemetery's edge. Not near, but deep in the trees, in a direction that, if you were to follow it, would take you away from the trail and into dense woodland with no landmarks and no path back. The crying does not get closer. It does not get further away. It stays at a constant distance, just far enough that you cannot identify exactly where it's coming from. Just close enough that the instinct to go toward it, to find it, to help it, is almost overwhelming. Every person who has reported this sound describes the same experience. The pull to go into the forest, and deep inside the forest. A group of 4 hikers who visited Steppe Cemetery in the fall of 2019 all heard the crying simultaneously. 2 of them immediately turned toward the sound and took several steps into the forest before stopping. They described it afterward as feeling like waking up mid-stride, suddenly aware that they were moving towards something in the dark woods and had no idea why they'd started walking. The group left the cemetery together, quickly, and did not speak until they were back at their cars. All 4 of them heard the crying for several minutes after leaving the cemetery. But the scariest experience in the cemetery is the figure on the stump, and this is the report that has followed Steppe Cemetery for longer than any other. Visitors, particularly those who visit at dusk or in the hours of full dark, have reported seeing a dark female figure seated on the stump. She is described wearing dark clothing, still facing the graves rather than the visitors. She does not move when approached or does not turn. When witnesses look away, even for a moment, she is gone. One couple who visited in the summer of 2021 photographed the stump on their approach to the cemetery. When they reviewed the photo later, the stump in the image had something on it, a dark shape, vaguely human, that was not visible to them when they took the photo. They were the only people in the cemetery. The photo has been examined by several people, but nobody has been able to identify what is sitting on that stump. Local residents of Brown County, people whose families have lived in that part of Indiana for generations, speak about Steppe Cemetery with a very specific kind of respect. The practical, matter-of-fact caution of people who know from experience that certain places require certain behavior. Don't go after dark. Don't sit on the stump. Don't follow sounds into the forest. And most importantly, don't disrespect what's there. Because Steppe Cemetery is not haunted in the way that most people mean when they use that word. It is not a location where unusual things sometimes happen. It is a location where a grief so enormous, so absolute, so concentrated in one small clearing in the forest, the grief of a mother who could not leave her child, has soaked into the land so completely that the land itself has changed. The forest around Steps Cemetery feels different from the forest 50 yards away. It feels quieter, darker, and more aware, as if it knows you're there. Steps Cemetery is still there today, still in the forest, still small, still weathered, still accessible to anyone willing to walk the trail. The stump is still there, and on quiet nights when the wind drops and the forest goes still, the crying starts again. From somewhere deep in the trees, from somewhere you should never, ever follow. Three places. One state that most people drive through without a second thought. And three stories that prove that the quiet places, the heartland places, the places that look peaceful from the highway, sometimes carry the darkest weight of all. Indiana State Sanatorium, where thousands died coughing in the dark, and where the coughing has never stopped. Hannah House, where people seeking freedom found fire instead. And Steps Cemetery, where a mother's love became a mother's grief, became something that sits in a forest clearing in the dark, on a stump worn smooth by years of vigil and watches. Indiana is quiet, is steady, is the kind of place that holds its stories close and doesn't volunteer them easily. But the stories are there. And if you've been to any of these places, if you've heard the coughing in the sanatorium wards, felt the weight in Hannah's basement, or stood at the edge of Steps Cemetery and heard something crying in the trees, please share your stories or experience if you've been to any of these places. Please subscribe and stay close, because next video we're heading somewhere new. Another state, another set of stories that the land refuses to let go of. Until then, if you're ever hiking in the Morgan Monroe State Forest and you hear a baby crying from somewhere in the trees, keep walking. Don't turn around. And whatever you do, don't follow it.